I don't have much strength left in my body, but there's something that still burns inside me, memory. I was only 7 when everything was taken from me. My name, my home, my family. That morning, I didn't know it was the last time I'd hear my mother's voice or feel her hands wrap around mine. I just remember her eyes, full of fear, full of love. Before they pulled me away, I never saw her again, and from that day on, I was no longer a child. I've carried this silence for too long, but before I leave this world, I need to tell you, not just for me, but for all those who never had the chance. If you're here now, maybe you were meant to hear this, and if any part of my voice touches your heart, I ask only one thing. Stay and listen to my story, like it if it speaks to you, and subscribe if you feel these stories deserve to live on. This is only the beginning. I remember the morning light that day. It came through the cracks in the wooden walls like it always did, soft and golden, brushing against the floor as if it was trying to wake us gently. My mother was already up, humming low, the way she always did when she didn't want to wake the little ones to fast. I heard the rustle of her dress, the gentle creak of the floor beneath her feet, the soft clink of the tin cup she used when she fetched water from the barrel. I was 7, and in that moment, I was still her little boy. I still belonged. The air smelled of cornmeal and smoke from the early fire she had started. That smell, it still finds me sometimes in my sleep. It's the smell of her hands, of our home, of before. My father wasn't a man of many words, but his presence filled the room. He sat by the door, fixing an old sandal with a bit of leather, eyes quiet but watchful. When he looked at me, he didn't smile wide, but his gaze held something warm, something like safety. My older sister braided her own hair in the corner, and my baby brother still lay curled up on the pallet beside me. We were poor. We had no gold, no fine clothes, no softness around us, but we had each other. And for a child like me, that was enough. That morning felt like any other. But now I know it was the last time we'd be a family. I don't know how long my mother had known what was coming. Maybe she heard it in whispers the night before. Maybe she saw the sign's footprints where there shouldn't be, eyes watching from a distance. Maybe she just felt it in her bones the way mothers do. But that morning, I saw something in her face that I didn't understand then. A quiet urgency. She moved faster, held me longer. She brushed crumbs from my shirt as if it mattered more than usual. She kissed my forehead twice. Not once. I remember that. Twice. We had a little patch of land behind the house where my father grew greens. He would take me out there sometimes, show me how to turn the earth, how to speak to it with your hands. He said the earth listened if you treated it right. That morning, he looked at the soil but didn't speak to it. He just stared, like maybe it was the last time he'd see it too. My sister held my brother closer than usual. Even the birds were quiet. I was too young to name fear, but I felt something heavy in the air. I asked my mother if something was wrong. She said no, and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that tries not to fall apart. I believed her because I was a child, and children believe their mothers, even when their eyes tell a different story. Then we heard the hooves. I didn't know what they meant, but my father did. He stood, fast. My mother stopped humming. My sister froze, her hands mid-braid. The sound came closer, horses, boots, and voices that didn't belong here. Loud voices, sharp ones, used to giving orders. I was told to stay inside. My father walked out first, then my mother, clutching my hand like her life depended on it. I tried to look out, but she knelt in front of me, both hands on my shoulders. Her eyes met mine, wet, but fierce. She told me to listen to her, just this once. She told me she loved me, and then she said something I didn't understand. Whatever happens, you remember who you are. You remember I never stopped trying. Then it happened so fast. The men came in like wine fast, loud, pulling, pointing. My father shouted. My mother screamed my name, and hands grabbed me. Not her hands, rough ones. I was lifted off the ground. I reached for her, but she was already being held back. I screamed. She screamed louder. My baby brother was crying, and my sister I don't know. I never saw her again. I never saw any of them again. They dragged me away while my mother's voice cracked through the air, calling after me, promising she'd find me. I believed her. I held on to her voice like a rope as they pulled me farther and farther away. I twisted, kicked, begged, but they didn't hear me, or they didn't care. I looked back once, just once, and saw her on the ground, arms outstretched, crying in a way no child should ever see their mother cry. That was the day the world stopped being mine. That was the day I stopped being 7. People talk about the first time they lost something. I lost everything in the morning, a single golden morning that still burns in my chest every time I close my eyes. I hold on to the memory not because it brings me peace, but because it's all I have left. That last morning wasn't just the end of my childhood, it was the end of a world. And no matter how long I've lived, I've never been able to go back. I tell it now so that someone, somewhere, might carry it forward, because if we don't remember that morning, it will be like it never happened, and I can't let that happen, not after all we lost. They took me far. I don't know how long we traveled, but it felt like the sun rose and fell too many times before we ever stopped. I wasn't crying at first. Maybe it was shock. Maybe something in me shut down to protect what was left. I remember the sound of the wagon wheels, the uneven rhythm they made over the dirt and rocks. I remember the coughs, the tired breathing, the occasional sobs from others nearby. I wasn't alone, but it felt like I was. Around me were other children, some older, some younger. None of them speaking. Our eyes would meet sometimes, but quickly look away. There was nothing to say. We all knew, without words, that something had been torn away from us. I kept replaying the last thing my mother said to me. Remember who you are. Remember I never stopped trying. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I held onto those words like they were food, like they were warmth. Every time I felt my chest started to shake, I'd whisper them inside my head to keep the tears from spilling. I was afraid to cry. I thought if I cried, I might break into pieces, and there was no one left to pick those pieces up. The men riding with us didn't talk to us, not with kindness anyway. If they spoke, it was to shout or command. We were objects now, not children. If someone fell asleep and slumped over, they were hit. If someone cried too loud, they were silenced. I didn't ask questions. I didn't dare. My body was there, but my mind kept running back to where my home used to be. I imagined my mother searching for me, calling my name into the woods, holding my baby brother to her chest while my sister held her tears back. I imagined my father angry, storming through trees, shouting into the dark. I imagined things that would never happen, because deep down, I knew I was alone now. The silence between us, the children taken, was not peaceful. It was the kind that presses against your ears, makes your heart beat louder just to fill the emptiness. Some of us tried to sleep, curled up in corners of the wagon, knees to chest, arms around ourselves. I remember the smallest one, a girl, maybe 5 years old, whispering to the air, calling for her papa. Her voice was so soft, like she was afraid it might disappear completely if she stopped using it. No one answered. Nah, the men, not the sky, not even the wind. That silence was the worst part. It came before the crying. It came before we understood what had happened. It came when we were still hoping it was all a bad dream, that we'd wake up and be home again. But that moment never came. When we finally stopped, it was night. We were pushed down from the wagon one by one. My legs were numb from sitting so long. The ground was unfamiliar, the air different, thick. I looked around and saw tall fences, buildings I didn't recognize, torches glowing in the distance. The place didn't smell like home. It smelled like smoke and iron and something else I didn't have a name for yet, something bitter. We were lined up, looked at, counted, judged. I didn't know why. No one told us. A man came by and touched my chin, turned my face side to side like I was a piece of fruit. He grunted and moved on. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move and my throat was full of stones. That's when the crying began. One child first, then another, not loud, not wild, but quiet crying, the kind that comes from deep in the stomach, the kind that knows no one is coming to help. I didn't cry yet. I waited until the others had been taken away, one by one, and I was left in a corner. That's when the silence cracked. That's when I let my face fall into my knees and the sound came out like a wound opening. I cried for my mother, for my father, for the ground I used to run on, for the sky above our old home, for the smell of firewood and her singing. I cried for the child I used to be, because I knew I wasn't him anymore. In just a few days, he had been buried somewhere inside me, too deep to reach. I cried not just because I missed them, but because I realized they might be alive somewhere, breathing under the same sky, but I'd never find them again. That kind of loss. It doesn't feel like death. It feels like floating through the world with your chest torn open and no one able to see the wound. I stayed in that corner until someone came and pulled me up, handed me something to eat, and pointed to a pile of rags I'd have to sleep on. I laid down without speaking. I listened to the others sniffling in the dark. We weren't a family. We weren't even friends. We were just broken voices in the same storm. That was the first night I understood that silence could be louder than any scream. That's the night I began to forget what safety felt like. They gave me a new name I didn't ask for. It didn't sound like me. It wasn't the one my mother whispered into my ear when I was scared, or the one my sister sang when she called me to eat. It was shorter, sharper, like it was meant to cut away whatever I had been before. They didn't ask who I was. They didn't care. I was now a number, a pair of hands, a back that could bend. That's all. The place they brought me to was not home, and it never tried to be. The walls were hard, not like the ones my father built. The ground didn't feel like earth, only dust and stone. Every sound echoed boots, commands, groans, silence after, punishment. I learned quickly that words had weight here, but only when spoken by certain mouths. The rest of us were expected to obey. I kept my head down. I didn't speak unless told. I watched the older ones, how they moved, how they kept their anger behind their teeth. I was still a child, but that word stopped meaning anything. Childhood is a thing that needs protection, softness, a sense of time that allows for dreaming. Here, none of that survived. I began to change without noticing. My body grew thinner, my eyes darker, my thoughts quieter. I still dreamed, sometimes, but it was never of flying or laughing. It was of escape, of running fast through trees, of hearing my mother's voice again. But dreams are cruel when they end at dawn. They leave you emptier than before. I remember the first time they told me to carry something too heavy. My arms trembled, and I stumbled. No one helped. No one even looked at me. I lay there for a moment, dirt in my mouth, and something inside me cracked not like a bone, but like a door that closed and wouldn't open again. After that, I stopped asking why. I stopped expecting kindness. Days had no names. Nights had no rest. I learned to move like the others, fast and silent. I learned which shadows to avoid, which faces to fear. But more than anything, I learned how to disappear. Not in body, but in spirit. I started talking less, even in my own head. I stopped counting the days since I had last seen her. I stopped waiting for someone to find me. I began to think maybe this was all there was, and maybe that boy from before, the one who played in the garden, the one who believed in his mother's promises, maybe he had gone for good. There was another boy I met during that time, a little older than me. His name was Elias. He had eyes that still looked for things, like maybe he hadn't let go of hope yet. We shared a corner to sleep in, sometimes a piece of bread if one of us managed to hold back. He told me stories of his father, of a river they used to walk beside. One listened not because I believed we'd ever see rivers again, but because it reminded me I used to have stories too. Elias didn't last long. One morning, he didn't get up. His breath had stopped during the night. No one said his name again. I tried to keep it alive in my mind, repeating it in silence like a prayer. Elias, Elias, Elias. But time wears down even the strongest memories. That's what they don't tell you. It's not the chains on your wrist that destroy you. It's forgetting the sound of your own name. I don't know how long I stayed there. It could have been weeks or years. Time, in that place, didn't move forward. It pressed down. Every day was heavy. Every night was a weight. The sun would rise, and I would rise with it, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. That's what survival becomes, not living, just not stopping. There were moments short, barely real, when someone would hum a tune that reminded me of home, or the wind would carry a smell that pulled me back to that last morning with my family. And for just a second, I'd remember who I had been, but it never lasted. The world I was thrown into didn't want me to remember. It wanted to shape me into something else, something quiet, something that didn't dream, and slowly, it succeeded. I began to feel like a ghost walking inside my own body. I kept moving because stopping meant punishment. I kept breathing because my body still knew how. But everything else, my laughter, my questions, my stories, they started to fade like smoke. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had fought harder, if I had shouted louder when they took me. But I was a child, and children aren't supposed to fight the wind. So I learned to float in silence. If you're still here, still listening, maybe it's because you feel it to that quiet ache we carry. If my story has touched your heart, let it live on through you. Subscribe if you want to keep remembering with me. He never said my name, not even once. I don't think he ever asked. He referred to me the way someone might speak about an object, a task, a tool. I remember the first time he pointed to me, it wasn't with anger, but with coldness, like he was selecting something from a shelf. I didn't look him in the eyes. We weren't supposed to. He owned the land, the house, the animals, and somehow he owned me too. Not my soul, not the boy I used to be, but everything else. My arms, my legs, my strength, my silence. I belonged to him in a way I didn't understand, and no one explained. They didn't have to. The rules were written in every look, every gesture, every punishment I saw others endure. I was still a child in body, but that meant nothing here. I was expected to rise before the sun, move fast, carry more than I could, and never question a thing. If I moved too slow, there were consequences. If I looked too long at the wrong person, there were consequences. if I existed in the wrong way, there were consequences. So I learned to shrink myself to be small without vanishing, quiet without disappearing. The place was wide, fields stretching far beyond what I could see, but I never felt freedom. Space means nothing when you're not allowed to choose where your feet go. I would look out sometimes, past the fences, past the trees, and wonder if anyone had ever made it past them. Did anyone run? Did anyone survive? But those thoughts were dangerous. I learned to tuck them away. I had work to do. The days were long and the tasks endless. I carried water, stacked bundles, fetched tools, fed animals. My hands were too small for most of it, but no one cared. If I bled, I was told to wipe it. If I cried, I was told to stop. I started talking to myself under my breath, not out loud, just a whisper of words so I wouldn't forget how to form them. Sometimes I would say my mother's name, just once a day, like a ritual. It was the only name that still felt real. Nights were not rest. We slept in a small, crowded room with straw on the floor and barely any air. The others were older, tired, broken in ways I didn't yet understand. They rarely spoke unless necessary. Their eyes held the weight of years, of things seen and felt and lost. I watched them closely, trying to learn how to last. There was a rhythm to survival there, one that didn't involve hope, only endurance. The man who owned us would walk through the yard sometimes, inspecting, silent. His boots were always clean, his voice calm, which made it worse somehow. He didn't need to shout. The fear lived in the space before his words. He had sons. They were older than me, dressed well, rode horses, laughed loudly. They didn't see me, not really. I was just a shadow passing by. Once, one of them threw a stone and hit my back. I didn't react. I knew better. Another time, I was carrying a heavy sack and fell in front of them. They laughed. I looked at the ground until they left. I told myself not to feel. I reminded myself I had a job to do. Emotions were dangerous here. I remember one woman, older, who used to hum when she worked, just a soft sound, barely there. But it carried something resistance. Maybe, one day, she was gone. No one asked. No one spoke of her again. That's how things worked. People disappeared, not always in body, sometimes just inside themselves. I began to feel it happening to me, like pieces of who I was were being left behind each day. One task at a time. I stopped dreaming. I stopped looking at the sky. I stopped counting the days. There was nothing to count toward. I ate when food was given, drank when water was passed, slept when allowed. My world shrank to orders and silence. One evening, I looked into a small puddle and saw my reflection. I didn't recognize the face. It was thin, sunken, the eyes dull. I touched my cheek and wondered if my mother would still see me in there. Would she know me? Would she cry if she saw what I had become? The thought hurt too much. I buried it. That night, lying on the floor, I tried to remember the sound of her voice and failed. It was slipping. I pressed my hands over my ears and whispered to myself, "Don't forget, don't forget." But memory is like smoke in the wind. The more you chase it, the faster it fades. Still, I whispered it every night. Her name, my name, the garden, the song she sang, anything that proved I had once belonged to someone who loved me. Anything that told me I was more than what they saw. Some days, I felt nothing at all, just motion, like a wheel that turns because it must. Other days, a sudden sound or smell would break something open in my chest, and I'd have to swallow it down before anyone noticed. They say children adapt, but what they mean is children surrender. I didn't adapt. I just stopped fighting, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how anymore. No one taught me to fight. For myself, I only learned how to obey, and so, for a long time, that's what I did. I obeyed. I used to hear the word freedom whispered between the older ones, always in the dark, always when no one else was around. They didn't say like it was real, more like it was a memory, or a ghost of something they once believed in. I didn't know what it meant. I had no shape in my mind for that word, no taste, no color, no place to pin it to. But I knew it was something important, because they only spoke it when their voices trembled. And even though no one explained it to me, I understood something simple. I didn't have it. Whatever freedom was, it wasn't here. It wasn't in the fields where we moved like shadows. It wasn't in the voices that ordered us around. It wasn't in the way we ate only when told, slept only when allowed, and worked until the stars came out and our bodies begged to stop. Sometimes I tried to imagine it. Was it a place, a feeling, a face that didn't look at me with ownership? Was it just the ability to walk in any direction without fear? I didn't know, but I missed it, even without knowing what it was. I missed it with everything in me. That's the thing about loss, you can feel it even when you can't name it. I was losing something every day, and I didn't have words for any of it. I woke up with a weight in my chest I couldn't shake, a pressure behind my eyes that didn't go away. My body moved because it had learned to move. My hands worked because they were taught not to stop. But my heart, it was getting quieter. It beat, but without rhythm. I stopped remembering how old I was. No one marked my birthday. Time didn't. Passing years. It passed in seasons, in harvests, in the way the wind changed. I knew I had grown taller only because the tasks got heavier, and I didn't fall as often anymore. But I didn't feel like I had grown. I felt like something had been carved out of me to make room for the labor. There was one night I remember clearly. The sky was wide open and the stars looked closer than usual. I stood for a second outside the quarters, just breathing, and for the first time in a long while, I thought of running, not planning it, not really, just the thought. My feet itched, my chest ached, but I didn't move. I was afraid not just of what would happen if I got caught, but of what might happen if I succeeded. Where would I go? Who would take me in? Would I even know how to speak to free people? Could I survive without being told what to do? That's when I realized how deep the chains had gone, not just around the wrist, but inside the mind. They had convinced us that we were safer in obedience, that to survive, we had to forget how to want anything more. And slowly, I had accepted that lie. That truth hit me harder than any hand ever did. I stayed up that whole night, eyes open, heart racing, and by dawn, I felt different, not free, not brave, just aware that something inside me was still alive, even if just barely. I started watching more closely after that, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. I looked at the men who gave the orders and saw their eyes too. Some were cruel, some were empty, but just a few looked scared of us. That confused me. What power could we possibly hold? But then I understood. The fear wasn't of what we were, it was of what we might become. If we remembered who we used to be, if we remembered that we were people, that we came from families, that we had stories, names, songs, that realization was dangerous not just for them, but for me. Because once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I began to remember things I thought I'd lost. The way my mother tucked my shirt, the way my father stood when he watched the sky, the way my sister whispered jokes into my ear. These memories didn't help me escape, but they helped me stay human and in that place. Staying human was the only rebellion I had. I spoke softer to the others. I shared when I could. I watched for those who couldn't carry their load. and helped if no one was watching. I was still afraid, still obedient on the surface, but inside, I had started to rise, not in pride, not in anger, just in memory. I didn't want to forget anymore. I didn't want to be what they said I was. I didn't even know who I was yet, but I knew I had once been someone, and I owed it to that child to remember. Some nights, I'd lie on the floor and hum to myself, no words, just sound, just enough to remind my lungs they still belong to me. And when the others heard, sometimes they would join in. No songs we learn here, just fragments of melodies we barely recall. It wasn't loud, it wasn't strong, but it was ours for those few seconds. Before sleep took us, we were more than what they saw. We were people with echoes inside us. And in that darkness, echoes were the closest thing we had to freedom. They came riding in on a morning that looked like any other. The sun had just cracked open the sky, and the air was still heavy with mist. I was carrying a pail of water across the yard when I noticed the men different from the usual ones, dressed sharper, faces unreadable. The man who owned us came out to meet them, and they spoke in low tones, glancing toward us now and then. We didn't stop working. We didn't dare. We kept moving, because that's what we were taught to do. Keep going. Don't look. Don't ask. But something in the air changed. It was quiet in a strange way. Not the usual silence of exhaustion or fear, but the kind that sits on your shoulders, makes your heart beat faster without knowing why. Then someone said the word, free, just like that. Like it was something you could drop into a yard full of people who didn't know what it meant. I heard it once, then again, passed from mouth to mouth, like smoke curling through the crowd. They say we're free. At first, no one moved. We just stood there, tools still in hand, backs still bent, breath caught in our throats. The man who owned us said nothing. He just turned and walked away. No explanation, no farewell. Just like that, he vanished back into his house and shut the door. I kept staring at that door, waiting for it to open again, for someone to step out and tell us what to do next, but it never did. I looked at the others. Some looked dazed, some confused. A few dropped what they were holding. One woman fell to her knees. A man laughed, sharp and short, like it was a joke too big to understand. No one cried, no one ran. We just stood there. That was the moment I realized I had no idea what freedom felt like all my life. I had waited for it without knowing. And now that it was in front of me, this invisible thing that was supposed to change everything, it didn't feel like anything at all. It didn't feel real. We didn't know what to do with our hands, our feet, our eyes. We didn't know where to go. For so long, our lives had been shaped by orders, by routines, by survival. Take that away, and what's left? A name we didn't recognize, a world we had never seen. I remember walking to the edge of the yard, the place where I used to stop, where the land stretched into trees and sky. I stood there, toes just touching the line I had never crossed. My heart beat so loud I could barely hear anything else. I was afraid, not of being punished, but of being wrong. What if this wasn't real? What if it was a test? What if I stepped past that line and someone dragged me back? But no one did. I stepped forward, one step, then another, and no one stopped me. The ground felt the same under my feet, but I didn't. Something in me trembled, like a string that had been pulled too tight for too long. I walked a little further, then stopped and turned around. Everyone was still standing there, unsure, waiting. That's the part people don't talk about when you've been caged your whole life. The moment the door opens, you don't rush out. You hesitate, because out there is unknown, and in here even with all its pain was familiar. Some people left right away. They had places they remembered, family they believed might still be alive. Others waited days, afraid to move. A few never left at all. I stayed for a while. I didn't know where to go. I had no name that would be recognized, no place that belonged to me. I wandered the land nearby, slept where I could, worked where I was allowed. Some towns didn't want us, others tolerated us, but only just. I learned that freedom didn't mean safety, it didn't mean welcome, it didn't mean peace. It meant being out in the world with nothing but your scars and your memory, hoping that would be enough. I saw cruelty in new forms, not with chains, but with looks, with laws, with silence. I learned to keep my head down even when no one told me to. I learned that some cages are invisible. Still, something had changed. Even if the world didn't see me as equal, I no longer belonged to anyone. No one could sell me, or give me a name, or command my sleep. That truth was small, fragile, but it mattered. I found others like me. We spoke softly at first, uncertain how much we could trust one another. But over time, we shared stories. Some spoke of mothers they never found again. Some spoke of brothers who ran north and never returned. Some spoke of the day they stopped feeling anything at all. And as we spoke, something grew between us. Not joy, not even hope, but memory. We remembered, and in remembering, we began to exist again. I worked where I could, never staying long. Some places paid me scraps, others gave nothing but a meal. I slept in barns, in fields, under trees, but I was not owned. That truth echoed in me even when I was hungry. I was not owned. I was not owned. I whispered it like a prayer, not because I felt powerful, but because I needed to believe it. Some nights, I still dreamed of the boy I used to be. I'd see him running barefoot in the garden, chasing the sound of his mother's laughter. And then I'd wake to the sound of nothing. With the stars above me and the cold in my bones, freedom didn't feel like joy. It felt like starting over with no map. It felt like walking with a hole inside you that no one else could see. But it was still freedom. And for those of us who survived, there had to be enough. I searched for her for years, not with maps or names I had neither, but with eyes that scanned every crowd, every village, every face that bore even the faintest resemblance to the woman who kissed my forehead twice on that morning. I used to imagine how she'd look if she had grown older. Would she have gray in her hair like I do now? Would she still walk with that soft rhythm in her steps, the one I used to follow like a shadow? I asked quiet questions in markets, looked at strangers too long, hoping they'd turn and call me by the name only she used. But it never happened. I never found her. The world is too wide and time too cruel. Still, she walked beside me, not in body, but in memory. In the way I folded bread before eating, in the way I closed my eyes when I felt the wind. She lived in those small things. She lived in me. I used to think I'd find the place we came from again, that little patch of land behind the house, the garden, the cracked walls where light came in. I told myself if I could just return there, I might feel whole. But when I did finally walk those roads again, everything was gone, burned down, replaced, erased, as if we had never existed. I stood where I think the house once stood and put my hand on the dirt. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there until the sun went down, letting the silence say everything. There are people who say we should move on, that the past is too heavy to carry. But I say, what else do we have? We are made of memory. Without it, we're just bodies waiting for time to finish its work. I carried my story alone for many years. I spoke it only in my mind, afraid of what it might break if I let it out. But silence wears you down. It fills the spaces where breath should live. And so I began to share it, first with one person, then another, and now, with you. Not because I want your pity. I don't. Not because I think my pain is greater than anyone else's. It's not. I share it because someone must. Because if we don't remember, then the ones who disappear stay gone forever. The children who vanish, the mothers who screamed into the wind, the names stripped away, the lives swallowed by fields and fences they deserve more than dust. I survived. I lived long enough to bury people I once thought would bury me. I worked until my hands bent, until my back curved like an old branch. I never had riches. I never wore fine things. But I carried names inside me, names that would have vanished if I hadn't. Some nights, when the air is still and the stars are out, I close my eyes and speak to them. I say my father's name, my sister's, my baby brother's, Elias, the boy who never woke, and her, my mother. I say her name soft, like a prayer. It still warms something in my chest. I don't know what happens after this life. I don't pretend to. But if there is another place, and if she is there, I hope she knows I never stopped looking. I hope she knows I listened, that I remembered, that I never let them take her from me completely. I leave this story here, not as a final word, but as a step of beginning for someone else to walk. Take what you heard and hold it, even if it's heavy. Speak of it, even if your voice shakes. We were here, we mattered, and the ones we lost, they still live in the telling. If this story reached you, if it made you feel even a little of what we carried, then keep walking with me a little longer. Subscribe so the silence doesn't win, and if you can, keep watching the rest. We left more pieces of ourselves in every chapter.